Now, government has withdrawn Eskom's exemption from some PFMA rules. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced the U-turn while being grilled in Parliament. It followed a public outcry over the move, but the minister made it clear the withdrawal was only to allow for wider consultation. The National Freedom Party says a temporary withdrawal is inadequate. We're joined now by NFP's Ahmed Munzoor Shaik Emam. Shaik Emam, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Yesterday was honestly quite a sight. MPs were definitely not holding back, even after being told the minister had withdrawn that exemption. You in particular shared your interpretation of that exemption, saying it seemed to you as though it was a deliberate attempt to defraud financial institutions or lenders by concealing the actual state of the entity. Talk to us about that position.
A very good morning to you and all our viewers out there. Yes, indeed. In fact, I think it's a deliberate attempt by Treasury, who ought to be the custodians of the assets and the finances of this country. It's totally unacceptable. Now, we broke it down in ABC language to the minister. When you go to a financial institution wanting to take a loan or buy a vehicle or whatever it is, you ought to provide financials. So what was the rationale behind wanting to provide an exemption to Eskom? And let us not forget that they've already given an exemption, particularly to Transnet. But what came out very clear from the minister and his entire team was that because of the financial state we find Eskom in, Eskom will not be able to go into the market and borrow. And government is not going to be able to be in a position to provide further bailouts. So what does it simply tell? That what National Treasury was doing by virtue of putting in place this exemption is to misrepresent or defraud lenders or financial institutions, both locally and internationally, to misrepresent, to manipulate the financials so that they would be able to provide financial assistance in terms of loans and things to Eskom. Now, surely this is unethical and cannot and must not be tolerated. The next question we had for the minister is, who did you engage with? Where did you get your guidance or your advice from? I promise you, for 4 hours we deliberated. Nothing, absolutely nothing came from National Treasury to convince us anything other than this was a deliberate attempt to misrepresent. Now, National Treasury also said that in the next 3 years, and look at the conflicting statements, in the next 3 years, it is not expected that Eskom will borrow. Then what was the need to do this? You've heard from the Auditor General, their response as far as that is concerned. It's totally unacceptable. Where is the level of accountability? If anything, National Treasury should put in further more stringent conditions for accountability, given the fact that we have high level of corruption, maladministration, and looting that takes place in the country.
We listened to Mkhuleko Hlengwa summing it up as legislative gymnastics, but when we listened to Treasury, it seemed that they were at pains to explain the problems faced by SOEs on the disclosure clause pertaining to Section 55, subsection 2B of the PFMA. What was your take home from just that explanation? Because I know many were getting quite upset, stating that you say there's a withdrawal, but what we're hearing from you here is you explaining that particular decision. What did you take, though, around what they consider to be the limitations or problems with that disclosure clause for SOEs?
What National Treasury did in the 4 hours yesterday, did everything possible to justify the reasons why they took that decision, and did not manage to convince any one of us. This time, I think we were unanimous in not being able to be convinced by National Treasury. Now, National Treasury is wanting to provide this exemption to Eskom. And remember, they're saying they have not withdrawn it. So I think that the reports in various media houses that it has been withdrawn is not a true reflection. What the minister said was that he wanted to have further consultations before he takes the decision. What we are saying, that you need to remove it with immediate effect. That's the first thing. We also need you to look at the exemption that you provided to Transnet. Now, all these state-owned entities, the question is, why do we find the state-owned entities in the state of disrepair, dysfunctional the way they are? You need to address those challenges that they face, not go out there and make it easier for them not to account. What does it mean? You're creating a conducive environment for more corruption and more looting. But very important, you know, the fact of the matter is this, that when you go out to the market and you want to borrow, you got to provide the financials. And here what you are deliberately attempting to do is to manipulate those financials, to misrepresent and mislead financial institutions, okay? Because it's obvious that if you put it in the financial statements, you are not going to get those funding. I mean, it's totally unacceptable for National Treasury to go to that extent. So any attempt by National Treasury to try and justify the action, they could not even tell us, who did you engage? Standing Committee on Appropriation, Standing Committee on Finance, Auditor General's Office, all these institutions, have you consulted us? Not at all. You take this decision.
Much was made of the Auditor General, though, apologies for interjecting, but I heard quite a lot was made of some sort of consultation with the Auditor General. But there was an MP who actually raised his voice and stated that there must not be an elevation of the consultations with the AG, specifically on Transnet, and equated to some sort of a consultation on Eskom because the AG doesn't handle the books of Eskom. What did you make of that back and forth when it seemed as though there was some sort of equating of the consultation on Transnet to the consultation on Eskom, whereas there was very little consultation on Eskom?
Well, actually, you know, we had a presentation by the Office of the Auditor General in Durban on Monday on the issue of Transnet and PRASA. And I can tell you, when the issue of exemption came up there, the Auditor General's office were totally unhappy about any exemption. And remember that National Treasury should not be discussing it first with Auditor General's office. They should be discussing it with the financial institutions or portfolio committees in the House and other role players to get guidance and advice as far as that is concerned. We are not convinced that they spoke to the Office of the Auditor General about Eskom per se. That clearly did not happen. And if you look at the response and the fact that the Auditor General Office is welcoming any attempt by National Treasury to withdraw this exemption, clearly indicates that the Auditor General's Office did not buy into that. There's been very little or no consultation as far as Eskom is concerned. So I think it was very misleading. What we found is that the National Treasury did not have the answers for us yesterday and attempted to just play around with words, and that's what it is all about.
There was a specific piece, an exceptional piece written by Kaya Statole, who's a chartered accountant and commentator, on this, and it seems as though the perpetual reporting on irregular expenditure that precedes a new board's tenure is what becomes a problem for these boards, where they're saying they find themselves constantly having to explain the sins of old and not just the sins they would have committed at a particular period. So would that not be what they were attempting to explain here? That's what then led to the exemption with Transnet, that you had the locomotives decision, the 1064, that was a decision taken before the current management. And they wanted to do away with that type of irregular expenditure where they only are able to account for irregular expenditure relating or pertaining to them.
Well, let's look at it. Financial institutions look at your ability to be able to repay the debt if granted, if the loans are granted. They don't look at what happened 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years ago. So I don't think it's justified for them to talk about the fact that it was not during their tenure that, of course, these particular irregular expenditure or fruitless and wasteful expenditure was made. What is important for you is to be able to satisfy lenders with the current state of your entity, that it is fit for purpose and is going to be able to pay back. That is basically what the requirement. Yes, we will to some extent agree that a lot of what the current boards and things are inheriting is from a few years ago. We're not going to dispute that. But that does not mean there's no irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful mismanagement of these entities currently. You hear it every other day. So very clearly, I think if you want to go out And like the National Treasury says that they cannot bail out in Eskom anymore. And I agree, they cannot continuously be bailed out with taxpayers' money. They must operate as a business. They must go out, borrow, and pay their debt. But very important, you've got to do it ethically. You've got to provide the information. And I can tell you, I mean, let's look at it from a simple exercise. If you went to go and buy a car today and you want to take a loan, and if you are fit for purpose and you are creditworthy at the moment, you think the bank is going to be interested in what happened 10 years ago? No, they're going to provide you that facility based on your current circumstances, that you are fit, you're going to be able, they are assured that you're going to pay back. That's what it is about. So I think, what National Treasury is doing, and it's not the first time they've been found wanting, I must be honest with you. Mm-hmm. The Integrated Financial Management System, they've paid monies, not... Yes, they paid invoices and things. No work was done, paid well in advance. Companies didn't exist. And to date, they have not even accounted for that. The question that arises, if the highest body in the country, National Treasury, responsible for the fiscus, for your money, for your assets in this country, find themselves in this position, manipulating financials, encouraging, enticing them to do these things in order to go and get money from the open market, locally and internationally. What confidence can we have in National Treasury? That's the question we need to ask.